Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Shiur is Leiluy Nishmat, Daniella, Shaina, Aleha Hashalom, Bas Yehoshua, Falik, Sheyichya, her neshama should have an aliyah, Ala Yidin Ayashia, the Kranka Arafia, the Gezinta Ayashia. Everybody should be blessed, should stay healthy, and Jews should be safe and sound all over the world. This is the third in the series, in the 6-part series of Shiurim, which I entitled Torah Has Body and Soul, where we go through different elements or different passages in Torah and show how Torah itself lends itself and wants to be understood on different levels and from different angles. There is the simple, there is the pshat, there is the remez, there is the drush, there is even the soid, the Kabbalistic and esoteric part, and how the Torah itself lends itself and begs to be understood on multiple different levels. Every aspect of Torah really is intended by Hashem to be learned in so many different ways. Over the past 2 weeks, we spoke about Moed Ani, the spiritual message, the halachic message, the remez, the explanation of it, etc. Tonight, I wanted to give to start on a different example. Not sure that we'll finish the entire discussion tonight. We'll see how we do. But once again, another element, another passage, another piece of Torah, which can be understood, which could and should be studied, begs us to study it on so many different levels and in so many different ways, and sometimes in diametrically oppositional ways, where the same thing, in some places in Torah, it's seen as something negative, in other places it's seen as something positive, as we'll see with Hashem's help tonight. So I want to begin the discussion with a story actually from last week's Parsha, from Parshas Lech Lecha. It's a little bit of a colorful story, so you'll bear with me. Again, something which we all know, but again, as we study it and delve into it, an entirely different reality and story emerges. As you gaze at it, you soon see that the rabbis the Chachamim had an entirely different vision as they study the story. So the story that I'm referring to from Parshas Lech Lecha is the story of Lot and his 2 daughters. So in very brief, as you all know, Lot and his family, Lot chose to take his family and live in a city, in a county actually, in a state called Sodom. Lot chose Sodom because Sodom was a land of plenty for his cattle. Sodom was a land which was immoral. Sodom was a land which was spiritually depraved, and Lot felt very comfortable there. Okay. The situation in Sodom gets so bad that Hashem decides that the entire state, it had 5, the state of Sodom has 5 cities, that they all need to be wiped out. To cut a long story short, only Lot and his family are destined to be saved, and even they are only going to be saved because of nepotism, because he is Avraham Avinu's nephew. So the angels come and they inform Lot that the entire city is going to be destroyed, and he has an opportunity to save himself and his family. The efforts to save Sodom and his family largely fail. Lot has 2 married daughters. They do not leave Sodom. Lot has sons-in-law who don't leave. In the end, it's only Lot, his wife, and his 2 single daughters, his 2 unmarried daughters, that escape the city. And even they don't all make it to their point of destination. Lot's wife, the Torah says, turns around despite the angel's explicit warning against turning around. Lot's wife turns around. She becomes a pillar of salt. To date, in the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, near the Yam HaMelach, there are those who still insist that they know or that they have some good idea where Lot's wife, a pillar of salt, is stationed. There is a pillar of salt there that actually does resemble the image of a woman, of a human being. And perhaps that's the pillar of salt that Lot's wife turned into. I certainly don't know. But be it as it may, when it's all over, it's Lot and his 2 daughters, and they're hiding in a cave. Okay, again, this part of the story is very famous. Lot's 2 daughters become convinced that it's not just Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah that have been destroyed, but actually the entire world has been destroyed, and there's nobody left for them to have children, kederach kol ha'oretz, as is the way of the land. And so the Torah tells us in Parshas Lech Lecha, the older daughter has a conversation with the younger daughter and says, listen, our old man, Avinu Zaken, our old man is an old man, and there's no other men around for us to have children with. So they plan to get their father drunk and to impregnate themselves with their father. They get their father drunk the first night, and the older one is intimate with her father, and she becomes pregnant. The Torah says Lot was intoxicated. V'lo yoda, quote, v'lo yoda b'shichva uvakuma. He knew not, Lot, because he was drunk, knew not about her lying down and about her getting up. He didn't know, he was drunk. She gets pregnant from this union. She has a son. She names him Moav, literally Moav from the father, as if to say that this child was impregnated from her own father, Moav. The following night, the younger sister does exactly the same thing. Once again, gives her father wine. Lot gets drunk. She herself also becomes pregnant from this union. She names her son Ben Ami, which is the father of the nation of Ammon. The nations of Ammon and Moav, two eternal enemies of the Jewish people, come from these two daughters of Lot, who became pregnant one night after the other. The first night, the older daughter. The second night, the younger daughter. On a simple level, the Torah does not add, at least the Chumash itself does not add more details than that. The Torah just says simply that they both did this and they both became pregnant. The older one had a son, he named him Moav. The younger one had a son, she named him Ammon. Ben Ami, which is the father of the nation of Ammon. Okay. On a simple level, this is a grotesque, disgusting story. Two women, sisters, engage in incest with their own father, speaks volumes of the ethical level of the two girls, speaks volumes, even as far as the Torah is concerned, of the ethical and moral values of their father Lot, who had chosen originally, we know about the moral character of this guy and his leanings, because he had chosen originally to live in Sodom because it was a land of immorality. And yet here they are with his own two daughters in the tent and with his own two daughters in the cave, and this is what happens. And the fact that they got their father drunk, and he didn't really know what was happening. The Torah says he didn't know when his daughters lay down and when they got up. So on the words of Uvakuma, when she got up, there's a little dot on top of the word. In a Sefer Torah, there's a dot on top of the word. Why is there a dot on top of the word? Says Rashi, it's the Torah's way of telling us, well, it's not as simple as it sounds. The official story is that he was drunk and he didn't know what was going on and he didn't know that she laid down, she didn't know that she got up, but the Torah puts a little dot there to tell you, yeah, not so simple. Actually, he did kind of know. He did kind of know. And yet, nevertheless, on the second night, when his younger daughter said, Tati Lomer Zogan Alachaim, here's a cup of wine, he didn't hold himself back. So he was playing shtick, v'mazakt. He was like, being passive aggressive. Officially, he didn't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. I was drunk. I didn't know. The Torah says not so simple. The first night when the older daughter is intimate with her father, he doesn't know that she laid down, that she got up. The Torah puts a little dot on top of the word of vakuma to tell us he really did know. Or at least he had a sense that something was going on. And nevertheless, the following night when the opportunity rolled around, Lot didn't say, something, no thank you. Lot could have said, listen, I don't know exactly what went on last night, but I'm not so comfortable with it. Lot said nothing of the sort. He was a willing participant. So again, on a simple level, Lot's two daughters engaged in incest and immorality. Lot himself, at best, passively aggressive, dig a little bit deeper, a willing participant. And this produces the nations of Ammon and Moav, eternal enemies of the Jewish people, about whom these two nations, the Torah will say later, Lo yovai Ammoni Moavi b'kal Hashem, their converts may not be accepted by the Jewish people. This is the simple meaning of the story, of course, as you all know. And then we come to a Gemara. This Gemara is in Masechta Nazir, Tractate Nazir, Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, page 23b, which actually it's an astounding piece of Talmud. Again, it's short. I'm going to read it to you because it makes one stop in their tracks. Omer Rab Chia bar Abin, Omer Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Says the Gemara, the sages of the Gemara, the sages of the Talmudic sages, Rab Chia bar Abin taught in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Quote: La'olam yakdim odam lidvar mitzvah. A person should always try, assert effort to do a mitzvah as soon and as fast as possible. Whenever you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, you should always do it as quickly as possible. Why? Or what's the source? Doesn't seem like a particularly innovative passage. Doesn't seem like a particularly great chidush. Of course, whenever you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, you should do it as fast as possible, as soon as possible, right? What's the big deal? Why? And it doesn't seem like any source is necessary. And if yes, you say, is reason makdim in lemitzvahs, right? Or now Parshas Vayera, Vayashkim Avram Baboiker, Avram woke up early in the morning to take his son to the Akedah. No, says the Gemara. I have something else in mind. You know where we learn, take a breath. From where do we learn that a person should be makdim, the person should strive to do a mitzvah as soon as possible? Listen to this. Shebischar lailo achas, in the merit of one night, shekodmosa bechiro letzira, that Lot's older daughter was with her father before his younger daughter, zochsa v'kodmo arboa doires beYisrael lamalchus. She merited, the older daughter, merited to precede her younger sister to the throne of the Jewish people by 4 generations. Again, let me just say that again. The Gemara says, a person should always strive to do a righteous deed, a dvar mitzvah, as soon as possible. Olam yakdim odam ledvar mitzvah. How do we know this? Because in the schus, the schar, as a reward for the older daughter of Lot, who became pregnant from her own father, one night before the younger daughter of Lot, before her younger sister, she, the older daughter of Lot, merited 4 generations of Jewish leaders and Jewish kings before her younger sister. End of quote. Okay. Now, before we ask the obvious questions on this piece of Gemara, first, what is the Gemara actually saying? What is the Gemara? What's the translation of the words? What is this 4 generations we're talking about over here? So it turns out that both sisters have sons, the older one Moav, the younger one Ammon, both of whom eventually have descendants who convert and become Yidden. Of course, these converts, in order to be accepted in the Jewish community, need to be female converts, not male converts, because the Torah says, Lo yovay Ammoni Moavi b'kal Hashem, that male descendants of Ammon and Moav may not convert, may not be accepted by the Jewish nation. The Gemara explains, Ammoni v'loy Ammonis, Moavi v'loy Moavis, Moavia. The prohibition applied only to male converts, not to female converts. This halacha was debated for centuries. We talk about it every year when we learn Megillas Rus, but it's not for tonight. But be it as it may, both Ammon and Moav have female descendants who eventually convert, become Jewish, and are accepted by the Jewish people. Who is the descendant of Moav that converts and becomes a Yid? This is the famous Rus. Rus, Hamoavia, Rus, the Moabite, that actually Rus was a descendant or a daughter of one of the Moabite kings by the name of Eglon. She converts in that very famous story of Megillas Rus that we read every year on Shavuos. She converts. A descendant of Moav, a descendant of the older daughter of Lot, becomes a Yid. Mazel tov. The younger daughter Ben Ami produces the nation Ammon. Ammon also produced a convert. You know what her name was? Naamo Hamoinis. Naamo Hamoinis. A woman named Naama from the nation of Ammon who eventually converts. Okay. Both of these women who convert, Rus and Naama, both have descendants who are kings, who are leaders in the Jewish people. Who were they? So Rashi explains. Rus, of course, has a son called Ovid. Rus herself gave birth to this son called Ovid. Ovid was the son that Rus had together with Boaz. Ovid has a son called Yishai. Yishai has a son called David Melech Yisrael. And David has a son called Shlomo who builds the Beis HaMikdash. Now, one of the women that Shlomo married, Shlomo had 1,000 wives, right? Actually, he had 700 wives, I believe, and 300 concubines. But, who's counting? One of the women that Shlomo married is a woman called Naama Ha'amonis. This convert called Naama from the nation of Ammon. Naama and Shlomo Melech have a son. Their son's name is Rechovam. Rechovam takes over the kingdom from Shlomo HaMelech. Rechovam is Shlomo's successor. His reign as a king is not peaceful. His reign as a king is not very long. During the days of Rechovam, there is a split because another Jew rebelled against the rulership of Rechovam. His name was, the one who rebelled against Rechovam, his name was Yerovam. Yerovam and Rechovam split the Jewish people. Rechovam, the son of Shlomo HaMelech, is left only with 2 tribes. Yerovam, who led the rebellion, takes 10 tribes. They go up to the northern part of Eretz Yisrael, known as the 10 tribes. Rechovam remains with the 2 tribes in the southern part of Eretz Yisrael. Around 100 or so years later, all these 10 tribes that initially broke away from Rechovam under the leadership of Yerovam, all these 10 tribes are lost. They're exiled in what the historians call one of the most puzzling stories in all of Jewish history, never to be heard from or never to be discovered again. Never to be discovered. Their tracks are lost to us. We don't know what happened. This is known as the famous exiling of the 10 tribes. Okay. But before the 10 tribes split off, Rechovam, the son of Shlomo HaMelech, is the king of the Jewish people. Again, the rebellion is led by Yerovam, who fought against Shlomo HaMelech and took away the 10 tribes. The story, by the way, of how that rebellion happens is also worth repeating. Very famous story, but it's worth repeating because it's amazing. The story is that after Shlomo HaMelech, after King Solomon passes, and it's time for his son Rechovam to take over, so the people come to Rechovam, Shlomo's son, and they say to him, listen, my dear, you're the next king. You're your father's successor. You're heir to the throne. Your father, Shlomo HaMelech, reigned supreme. The whole world was awed by him. The whole world was scared of him. He was a mighty, mighty emperor. He was the wealthiest and the most successful, and he built the Beis HaMikdash, and everybody bowed down to him, literally. They said to Rechovam the son, but your father, Shlomo HaMelech, also had a tough side to him. He was very hard on the Jewish people. He was very demanding when it came to taxes. He took a lot of money in taxes. He didn't only take taxation from them in the terms in the sense of funding. He made them work, those who could, physical labor. You read the stories, the buildings, the Beis HaMikdash, the things that Shlomo built. He put hundreds of thousands of Jews to work physically. And he was just a tough boss, powerful, successful. He had the support, he had everything he needed. You couldn't mess with him, but he was rough on his people. They said to Rechovam, they said to his son, look, you're his son. You're the next in command. Shlomo HaMelech has passed. Your father's a Homa Lichtike Gan Eden. They said to him, it's time to ease up on the people. let everybody take a deep breath. Let them live a little. Come in a little softer than your father did, because he was a force to be reckoned with. They beg Rehovam to be easier on the people than Shlomo HaMelech. Rehovam tells the delegation that make this request of him that he's going to consider it. He says, I'll think about it. And then he took advice with two groups of people. He took advice with his father's advisors. He took advice with what was considered the senior advisors of the nation. And he took advice with the junior members of the nation. He took advice with his own peers, with his own chevra. And of course, as is customary among Jews, they gave him two very different opinions. The older generation, his father's advisors, told him that he should do exactly what he was being asked to do. They said, everything you're being told, my dear Rehovam, is correct and true. Your father was amazing, but he was tough as nails. And the people could really, really benefit from you coming in a lot softer. You would do very well, they told him, if you came in with a very different tone than your father. They reassured him. They said, don't worry. With time, you'll build a good rapport with the people. With time, they'll come to love you and respect you, as they did King Shlomo. With time, you'll win them over, and you'll be able to put them to work. You'll be able to exact from them taxes. You'll be able to do what it is that you need to do. But you can't start off that way. You got to build the political capital. They said to him, start off as a servant of the people. And then with time, they'll serve you. The older generation gave him that advice. The younger generation came to him and they said, oh, no. Don't you bite the bait, they said to Rehovam. Don't do it. They're just trying to manipulate you. They think you're weak and they think they can push you around. They want to show you from day one that they're going to tell you what to do instead of you telling them what to do. Don't do it. Don't make yourself weak in their presence. You'll never be able to get your strength back. Today is day one, his buddies told him, you lay the law down. You show these people that you are not to be messed with. You're the king. Show them who's boss. Don't let him push you around like that, the younger people told him. Well, what do you do now? Now Rehovam has both these voices in his head. One says to him, be nice, be gentle, be soft. Make the people fall in love with you. And then you can become Moshe Grois. Then you can exert your power. The other voice said to him, no, they're just trying to work you. They're just trying to weaken you. From the day one, this is a challenge, his younger friends told him. Stand up to the challenge, rise up, slay the dragon, show him not to mess with you. No, he debated back and forth. In the end, he decided to listen to his friends, to the younger people who gave him advice. And he came back to the delegation who asked him to come in softer. And he said to them, I am not just going to be as rough as my father. I'm not just going to be as difficult, as heavy as he was. I'm going to be worse. I'm going to be stronger and tougher and even more aggressive. He says, my father's loins, Rehovam tells them, my father's loins, my father's waistline, is the size of my pinky, meaning I'm going to be so much bigger than him. And the people heard that, and they rebelled. And the Jewish nation was split, and 10 tribes left the kingdom of David, and Shlomo and Rehovam broke away, became idol worshippers, had very, very spiritually depraved leaders. And about 100 or so years later, were exiled from the land of Israel, never to be heard from or seen again, ever. And I should tell you, as we finish this thought and get back to my shiur about the daughters of light, I should tell you that the rabbis, in studying the story, had some very unkind words to people who listen to the advice of young people rather than listen to the advice of older people who have life experience. And I'll give you the quote. They said, Stiras zekenim binyan hi, binyan tzeirim Stirohi. I'll translate. They said when old people, doesn't mean people who are old, means people who have life experience, people who know what they're talking about, people who have seen things. The rabbi said, when they destroy, their destruction is really building. And when young people build, their building is really destruction. And it's the rabbi's way of saying that Rehoboam deserved exactly what he got, because he didn't have the wisdom. He didn't have the sensitivity to know that when you're faced with conflict and you're getting two pieces of advice, people with experience or without experience, people who've lived life and know how things work, or young, hot-blooded, perhaps well-intentioned individuals who have no life experience. Even if you think that what the older people are telling you to do is destructive, if you follow it, you'll build beautiful things. You'll build beautiful lives for yourselves and for others. And if you follow the advice of young people, even if it looks like they're giving you advice that you can use to build amazing things, their advice is destructive, because there are certain things, there's a certain quality of wisdom that there's no other way to get it other than through experience. That's it. There's no other way. You can be smart, you can be bright, you can be well-intentioned, you can be insightful, you can be intuitive, you can be out. No experience doesn't measure up to a person. Ein chacham kabal nisayon. Be it as it may, let's get back to the story. Rehoboam, the son of Shloimeh, was a descendant of the nation of Ammon. So Ammon, produced by the younger daughter of Lot, gets one descendant, a Jewish king, Rehoboam. From there, of course, the line of David and Shloimeh continues. What about her older sister? What about the older sister, the one the Torah describes as the Bechira, the older sister? She started her line of Jewish leaders and kings, started 4 generations before that, with a man named Oved, who gave birth to a man called Yishai, who gives birth to a man called David, who gives birth to a man called Shloimeh. Okay. So the older sister's entrance, the older sister's descendants' entrance into the Jewish nation begins with 4 generations of leaders and kings before the younger sister. Okay. Says the Gemara, from here you learn that a person should always rush to a dvar mitzvah, because in the zchus of the fact that the older sister got to her father one night before the younger sister, she merited to have David HaMelech, Shloimeh HaMelech, Oved and Yishai. And so from now on, everybody should do mitzvahs as soon as possible. Now you read this Gemara, and it makes your mind explode into a million pieces. Lot's daughters were engaged in a mitzvah? What kind of a mitzvah is that? And Lot's older daughter is motivated to be one night earlier than her younger sister because she wants to do a mitzvah as soon as possible. That's not the simple reading of the story. The simple reading of the story is that the older one was more promiscuous and more coarse and more of a spiritually and morally and intimately depraved human being who basically talked her younger sister into doing this. And that's why she went first. Oh, says the Torah, says the Gemara, because of the zchus that she went one night earlier, because of that, she merited to have David HaMelech and Shloimeh HaMelech and Oved and Yishai as her descendants. Harrowing piece of Talmud. What's the Talmud trying to tell us? That they had noble intentions here? That they were trying to produce a David HaMelech and a Shloimeh HaMelech? And then let's ask another question. Let's ask the mother question here, really. David HaMelech and Shloimeh HaMelech, the Jewish kings, tzaddikim, ancestors of Mashiach, ancestors of the entire Jewish dynasty of monarchs and rulers. What kind of a yichus is this? Were their bubbas conceived? In a cave with Lot and his 2 daughters. Ribono shel olam, what is going on here? Why? Why would this type of yichus, why would David and Shlomo, why would Hashem make it so that this is where they come from? Why not, what would be wrong with a normal family? The grandfather was a Rosh Yeshiva. The grandmother was the daughter of another Rosh Yeshiva. A Goreis Choshev Rav who wrote Sforim and Halacha. What's the problem with that? No! David and Shlomo come from Lot and his 2 daughters in a cave. Ribono shel olam. Why? Well, I'm not always comfortable with the question why, because Hashem runs the world and we don't know why. But what's the Torah trying to tell us? Gets better. You remember I told you about that little dot in the Chumash, in the Torah, on top of the word of Vakuma. V'lo yoda b'shichvo Vakuma, the Torah says, Lot doesn't know his older daughter lies down and gets up. There's a little dot on top of the word of Vakuma. Even in the Ashkenazi Sefer Torahs, they have this little, in Sefer Torah itself, there's a little dot. I told you the dot is there to tell you, Chazal say, that Lot, he wasn't as ignorant as the Torah makes it sound, yes? There's a passage in Zohar that gives a very different explanation on the little dot. The Zohar makes a very interesting observation. The Torah says, the second night, when the younger sister does the same thing her older sister does, and once again the Torah says, V'lo yoda b'shichvo v'kuma, there's no dot. So why is there a dot by the first one and not by the second one? Open your hearts, my friends. The Zohar says the dot represents the Ribono shel olam. That dot, right on top of the word of Vakuma, represents the presence of Hashem. Hashem's presence was present the first night in a way that it wasn't present the second night. Why not? Because Hashem was coordinating that this union happen. Hashem wanted to make sure it would happen on the first night, because ultimately from this would come Rus, and from this would come David, and from this would come Mashiach. The second night, the union wasn't as important. The first night it was. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, Matzasi David Avdi, I found my servant David. The Medrash says, where was David found? Matzasi b'stayim. I found him in Stein. One more point I want to add, then I want to explain. This Rashi even himself alludes to. The Medrash has another observation on this. Lot and his 2 daughters escape. They make it to some cave, and they think the whole world is deceased. So they get their father drunk, and they're intimate with him. You know what the Medrash asks? The Medrash asks, Azoy, says the Medrash, tell me, where'd they get the wine from? Where'd they get the wine from? What, are they running away from Stoim with wine in their backpacks because they may end up with their father alone? They're going to need to get him drunk? Who thought of this to bring wine? Where'd the wine come from? Rashi quotes half the Medrash. They found the wine in the cave. That's what Rashi quotes for the Medrash. They found wine in the cave and they used it to make their father drunk. Now, let me ask you a question. Who put wine in the cave for the 2 daughters of Lot to make their father drunk? Who put the wine there? The Medrash fills in the rest of the details. Who do you think put the wine there? Hashem, the Ribono shel olam. He put it there from the 6 days of creation because he knew that one day Lot and his daughters would end up there. And this would need to happen. Okay. What I'm trying to show you here is that here you have one story, which at the outset, on the surface, seems like a terrible story. And yet, as soon as you start to read the writings of the Chazal on this, an entirely different reality emerges. We're talking about this goes from a story of a dysfunctional family engaged in incest to a paradigm, to an iconic moment from which we learn that a person should always be makdim lidvar mitzvah. Because look, the older daughter, in the schus of her being makdim lidvar mitzvah, doing the mitzvah early, merits to have Oved, Yishai, David, and Shlomo. Okay. Does the Gemara mean that she, the older girl, intended this consciously? That this was her intention? That she rushed because she was engaged in the Dvar Mitzvah? Does the Gemara mean that Hashem is lurking and working in the background to make this happen? Once again, the same story can be learned at different levels. On a pshat level, she was an immoral woman. On a deeper level, according to the Gemara, there's an expression the Gemara uses in other places, not here, but it's the same idea. L'shem shamayim niskavna. Somehow, she can sense and she can tell and she can feel that there's a spiritual, divine shlichus and mission that has to materialize here, and she's in a position to carry it out. Perhaps she looked at the wine and said to herself, if the Rabbeinu Shalom put wine here, there must be a reason. Perhaps she looked into her father Lot. Perhaps she could sense something in his neshama. Perhaps she could sense something in her own neshama. Perhaps she could sense in the words of the Zohar that Hashem's presence here was seeing to it that something like this come about. But all of a sudden, we're talking about a very, very different story. We're talking about the origins of the neshama of David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, and Mashiach. Why? Why do they have to come from such a difficult and depraved place? There's a beautiful expression in the Gemara. The Gemara says, if you want to be appointed as a leader over the community, over the Jewish community, nobody gets appointed as a leader over the Jewish community unless they have a knapsack, unless they have a backpack full of bugs and snakes hanging off their back. It's a Talmudic expression which means nobody gets appointed as a leader over the Jews unless they have stuff in their past and in their history that keeps them humble. Even David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, the greatest kings ever, also had stuff in their past and in their history that on the most simple level was necessary to remind them to stay humble, even as they ascended the greatest throne that was humanly possible. But there's a much deeper spiritual meaning to this, which we're going to start now, and please God, finish next week. You see, Mashiach, ultimately, descendant of David and Shlomo, who comes to redeem the world and comes to liberate everybody and comes to elevate the world to its highest and greatest, the purpose of all of creation. In order for Mashiach to be able to do that, Mashiach has got to be able to find the sparks of godliness and the divine purpose in even the most seemingly darkest of places, even the most far-flung of places, even the most difficult and seemingly non-spiritual Jews. If the person who is going to merit to be Mashiach is going to be the person that's going to bring it all together, collect everything, even stuff, even things that seemingly seem as far from godliness as possible. When Mashiach turns the light on and we finally see what the purpose of all of this was, it's that one moment, it's that one explanation that answers all the questions where everything comes together. The analogy that's given for this is, if you want to lift a building, you have to lift it all the way from the bottom. That's why the Kabbalists say, that's why Mashiach's ancestry is not so pretty. It comes from Lot and his two daughters. As if to say, Mashiach has the ability to lift everything out of the darkness, to show how everything is connected to Hashem, Even things, when you look at it at first glance, you think to yourself, Rabbeinu Shalom, this is terrible. And yet even that, Mashiach is able to lift and bring close to Hashem. There are different perspectives on whether Lot's daughters knew what they were doing consciously, or whether this was some higher state of consciousness that they weren't even aware of. The Gemara clearly seems to allude to the fact that this was something that they were aware of. Be it as it may, what the Gemara is telling us is, when you read a story like this in the Torah, don't be fooled. Don't think, 3 human beings sitting around in a cave with nothing to do. The Gemara says, nah. Think about what comes from this. Think about the Jewish leaders, the tzaddikim that come from this. There is a spiritual and divine power that's working behind the scenes or in the scenes, which will take generations and hundreds of years, thousands of years, until we see the full impact of it. I want to wrap up the Shiur with this, and then when Mitzvah Hashem next week we'll continue. I want to wrap up the Shiur with saying this. You know what I think is the first and immediate lesson we learn from this? Sometimes we go through stuff in life, and we ask ourselves, what's going on here? What's the purpose of this? Why does the United States have to wait so long to find out the results of the elections? I want to know the results of the elections, for example, or things of this nature. Sometimes we look around ourselves and we think to ourselves, what is going on here? What's the purpose? Why did Hashem bring coronavirus to the world? Shut down the shuls and the schools for God knows how long. Everybody lives with fear and worry. What's the reason for it? We don't know. We don't know because we're not God. And only God knows. But this we do know. Whenever something happens in the world, there's that little dot right on top of it. Whenever something goes on that seems confusing and that seems strange and that seems bizarre and depraved and sometimes perverted, there's always that little dot that rests right on top of the word. It's the Torah's way of saying, you're not alone. Hashem's presence is here, and Hashem is coordinating this and making this happen exactly as it's supposed to be. Exactly. Why? What's the purpose? What's going to come out of this? Maybe you'll know in 100 years. Maybe you'll know in 1,000 years. Maybe you'll know in 4 generations. Maybe you'll know in 1. But the results will one day show up. And when they do, everybody will go, oh my God, this comes from that. How? You're never alone. Things don't happen at random. If something's going on, there is a Rabbeinu Shalom that sits behind the scenes and controls it and masterminds it and crafts it in a way that is perfect, exactly the way the Rabbeinu Shalom intends. And when it's time for us to see the reason, we'll see the reason. When it's time for us to see the repercussions, we'll see the repercussions. Until then, we may never know. We do our best, you see. We do our best. We make our ishtadlus. We do our best to live a healthy life, to do what it is that Hashem wants. But when things happen out of our control, we always remember the Eibishter führt die Welt. Hashem leads and runs and controls. A Jew has to have betochen. I'm saying this because I know there's a lot of concern about the political and social unrest around us. And Jews have to remember to act responsibly and act in accordance with Shulchan Aruch and do everything right. But when it's all done, we always have to remember what happens in this world happens because Hashem wants it to. Hashem controls, Hashem runs, Hashem decides. Hashem protected us for 3,500 years, and will please God continue to protect us even more. A Jew's not supposed to live with fear. Nothing happens at random. If there's wine in the cave, Hashem put it there 6,000 years ago, the 6 days of creation. Whatever happens in this world beyond our control happens because Hashem wills it and coordinates it that way. Fear not, my dear fellow Jews, Yisrael betach ba'Hashem. Everything will work out exactly according to Hashem's plan. It's all for the sake of the Jewish people. Please God soon. Mashiach will come. We'll have all our questions answered and everything will make sense. Have a wonderful Shabbos.